jump right on into our event and start answering some questions. So we're going to kick things off with you, Karen, if you don't mind. Question number 1 is, how do I hire a lawyer? What do I ask them? And what documents do I need to gather?
Well, there's no good place to go for the best lawyer in family law. There's no, resource really per se. You certainly don't want to go with whoever comes up on Google first. That's the person who paid the money to get there. And you don't want to go with someone who says father's rights or mother's rights, because there's really no such thing. And that's just a marketing ploy by the law firm. So I know it's hard. If you're getting a divorce, it's hard to ask your friends for a referral because you may not want them to know that you're getting ready to get divorced or that you're even considering it. So what I suggest you do is, if you have a lawyer in your life, somebody who maybe did your will or estate plan or a real estate closing, or a friend who's a lawyer, ask that person who's a good trusted family law attorney in your area, in your county, who does practice in that area and really focuses in that area. You want someone who's very experienced. I'd say the more years in practice, the better. The person who really focuses on family law and almost exclusively on family law. And somebody you feel comfortable with. So you're going to talk to the lawyer. You're going to maybe interview a couple of different lawyers. Ask them the questions that are very important to you. If it's about your children, about your finances, your house, have those questions ready. And do you feel comfortable with that? That lawyer speaking English to you? I know a lot of lawyers speak in legalese and they're off-putting. So you're going to be going through a very difficult part of your life, this short period that you're going to be getting divorced, and you need somebody you can communicate with and feel trust and confidence. And if you don't feel that, go with your gut. When you go to the lawyer, you're going to want to gather documents, financial documents, like 3 years of tax returns. You're going to want to know what your mortgage balance is and approximately what your house is worth, if you can Google that. Also, you're going to want to know the balances, if you have this information, of all your bank accounts, your husband's bank accounts, joint bank accounts, retirement accounts, and all of those types of things. So the more of that information you have, the better. But it's not always necessary to have that in the very first run, because you might just be feeling out that lawyer in the first interview. And I think the list, what was that last question, Nicole? I think you had like...
Yeah, sure. The question was, how do I hire a lawyer, what to ask, and what documents to gather?
I think I answered that question.
Yeah, I think you did.
Yeah, you did.
So I think then we can turn really quickly on over to estate plans, Whitney. We're wondering, why do we need an estate plan?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, where people might not necessarily have the largest estate or a taxable estate, but there's many benefits of having an estate plan, even if you don't have a taxable estate. You want to leave your assets to your family the way you want to. And if you don't create a will or a trust and put in that will or trust who you're going to be leaving that property to, ultimately the state laws will determine who you're leaving your assets to. So to ensure that those assets go to the people that you want to, it's important to create a will or a trust and define that in the terms of the will or the trust. Also, a will or trust can provide protection for beneficiaries. So if you have a minor child, you can create a trust to protect them while they're a minor and have distributions paid out to them, over a period of time, and also protect them from creditors, divorce, and other outside influences. Or, if they are unable to manage their own money, it can be helpful to hold those assets in a trust for their benefit. It's also, many people create an estate plan to avoid probate, which is a costly and timely and also public process. By creating a trust, it's a lot more efficient after you pass away, or by putting designations on your retirement accounts and putting assets into joint tenancy or in a trust allows you to avoid that probate process. It also provides benefits if you become incapacitated during your lifetime by creating a power of attorney for property, and a power of attorney for healthcare, you're appointing somebody to make financial and medical decisions in the event you become incapacitated. So it's very beneficial in that way because you are choosing who those people are, someone you trust in those positions. And that's also very important for naming an executor under a will or a trustee under a trust, is just making sure those people you're choosing, you are the people you want to be managing your assets and making medical decisions for you. So those are kind of the main benefits of preparing an estate plan.
I would add on to that as well is not only having the appropriate documents in place, so working with someone like Whitney, but then oftentimes what Mary Beth and I will find when we're meeting with a brand new client is they have fabulous documents, but they didn't implement them or fund the trust. And so one of the things you'll hear all of us highlight is the need for the team. And so it's pretty common where Mary Beth and I will work with Whitney or your estate planning attorney to make sure that you're retitling all your assets into the trust, updating beneficiaries, just making sure that truly the time and money that you invested on your estate plan is going to be carried out. And one of the things, and I might be jumping ahead, Nicole, so I apologize, would be perhaps we may want to weigh in, do you want to make any changes to these documents while you're going through a divorce? Mm-hmm. You certainly will want to afterwards, but I know we always find it interesting to get both the estate planning attorney and then the family law attorney perspective on how to handle that during the process.
So yeah, so you can definitely update your estate plan while you're going through a divorce, but you should also consider updating it once a divorce is finalized as well. One of the main things I would say is execute new powers of attorney for healthcare and property, so that if something happens to you while you're in the middle of a divorce, your spouse is typically the person you would have named prior, or if you don't have a power of attorney, your spouse under the statute typically has the right to make medical decisions for you unless a guardianship was opened on your behalf, which is obviously costly. So it's a court-involved process. So by creating those documents, you're naming an agent while you're divorced other than your spouse to make medical and financial decisions if you were to become incapacitated. You also can update your will and your trust while you're going through a divorce, but maybe Karen can comment a little bit more about this, but you have to be careful to make sure that you're talking to your professionals, whether it's a divorce attorney or an estate planning attorney, to not be transferring assets. If you don't have a trust, you're not going to want to be funding a trust during a divorce or changing beneficiary designations on retirement accounts while you're in a divorce, but you can certainly update who your executor is, who your trustee is under your documents to be more consistent with removing that spouse from your documents.
The bottom line with going through a divorce is you aren't always sure how the assets are going to come down. Are you going to own this? Are you going to own that? Are you going to divide things? So when you start leaving assets to different people in your estate plan, you may not have them to give up. So there are considerations, and that's a really good idea if you're going to be getting estate planning advice during your divorce, is to consult with the attorney so there's a little bit of a communication.
Would you agree that during the divorce, Karen, that at least the health and the property power of attorney rather, should be updated? And that's not considered a shot over the bow by the other party?
Yeah, no, I definitely do. And a lot of people feel uncomfortable having their spouse who they're fighting with, right? They're, hopefully you're not completely at odds, but there are a lot of contentious divorces. We all know that. And the last person you want to be making medical decisions for you who could stand to gain from a bad decision. You don't want that to be your spouse. So clearly that's something that a lot of people are concerned about and should do during the divorce.
Should that be disclosed to the other party when you do that, or does that need to be disclosed?
That doesn't need to be disclosed voluntarily. Now, in the process, if the other side sends a demand saying we want to see your estate planning documents, surely you have to turn that over. But that's really up to you to decide who's going to be your executor, who's going to make medical decisions for you. And no court's going to tell you to do otherwise.
That's great clarification. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to turn things over to Nicole and Mary Beth for a more financial question. And I guess let's hand this off to Mary Beth. The question is, I have not been involved in the finances during our marriage, and my spouse is secretive about sharing information. How do I deal with this?
Well, that's actually a great question. And the person that submitted it is not alone, because Nicole and I see this very often with the clients that we deal with. And I would say the first thing that you need to do is share that with your attorney, because there are ways that you can get information yourself by being, I'm probably dating myself, but being like a Nancy Drew, or, for yourself, and also working with your attorney, because you can subpoena documents. If the level of cooperation has diminished to that level, then you need to have your attorney be your advocate and then work to do subpoenas. However, before that though, you can get tax returns. If you and your husband or wife have been using a CPA to prepare a joint tax return, that CPA represents both of you. So even if you may have been filing electronically and you say, I never got a chance to see it, you can submit a request to your CPA to get a copy of that. And if that doesn't seem to be working, which it shouldn't be the case, but it's not unusual for the CPA to say, I don't want to get involved, but he or she should be providing that to you. You can also request a copy of your tax return for the last couple of years from the IRS. It may not be the full tax return, but you do have that capability. The other thing to do is you can call your bank, because most likely you are also on the title of your mortgage, to get mortgage information. You can call the county to get your real estate tax information. The same thing if you're trying to figure out what your budget is for your utilities and things like that. So there's a lot of things that you can do to be your own best friend in securing some of those documents. And the other thing too is, watch in the mail, especially at month end. If you are still receiving paper documents for your investments or your 401ks, because usually those are sent quarterly, take a copy and you'll start to keep a file for yourself. And if it's a really contentious divorce, keep a file that is not in your home, whether that's kept electronically or with a trusted friend or family member, because you just want to make sure that you can have easy access to work with your attorney. Nicole, I welcome all your thoughts too on that.
Yeah, I think you covered the major points. The one thing I would tag on is, in addition to watching out for things month end, is we are in the heart of income tax season. And even though a lot of people have statements or other communications set to electronic delivery, oftentimes you'll still get many of your tax documents hard copy mailed to the home. So again, that's been occurring since probably about the end of January. So, if you've got a stack of mail or things like that, you'll just want to review and then make copies of any of the financial information. And at this point, generally, Mary Beth and I say, it's okay if you don't understand it or even know what you're looking at, but anything you come across with a dollar amount or a value on the page, make a copy or take a picture, because your attorney and your financial advisor will be able to help you make heads or tails of it. So the more information you have, the better off you'll be from a starting point of helping educate yourself, and then also helping your attorney get a good understanding of your situation.
Wonderful. Since we were starting to speak of attorneys there, I think we should turn things over to Karen. again. And with that question, the question for you, Karen, is how much does a divorce cost? How do I keep costs down? And what role can mediation have?
On divorce. Why? Because every divorce is different. Some people agree on the children's issues immediately. They spend very little time on it. And then some people argue forever about the financial issues and finding money that was withdrawn, or are fighting about what the maintenance obligations might be. Some people can settle all that stuff and they fight about who's going to get Christmas and Halloween. So it all depends on how many issues you have, depends on the quality of your lawyer. It depends on how reasonable both you and your spouse are, because, you know, I encourage everyone to be reasonable during a divorce and not fight over Tupperware and things that don't really matter. But you can only be so reasonable when your spouse is being unreasonable. And as we all have heard and seen the movies and known our friends, you know, people get mad and angry and jealous and all of those things, and will take it out on the spouse and will fight about things that will know that will upset the other party. So the average cost of a divorce in Illinois, last I checked, was $11,800. I have seen cases that are very complicated with millions of dollars settle under $5,000 because everybody just splits it in half and they go on their merry way. And then I've seen cases with not a lot of assets that will cost the parties over $100,000. They borrow money from their 401k or their grandparents, and it's just a nightmare. So how to keep the costs down? You know, be prepared. Listen to what your lawyer says. Get the right lawyer. You know, the cheapest lawyer is not the best lawyer. This is now not the time to, you know, got my Diet Coke, which is my one really bad vice in life, better than crack cocaine, I guess. But it's not like you should say, oh, McDonald's is cheaper than Burger King. That's not what we're talking about here. And you also don't need the designer lawyer from the designer firm. You have to have the lawyer who's going to get the job done, because even if a lawyer charges more, that lawyer might be more responsive and move the case forward and get the case out of court, which is good for you mentally and emotionally, right? And good for your family, but it's cheaper in the long run. The longer it goes, the more you're going to pay your lawyer. The other thing is, you know, just don't bother your lawyer with therapy questions. He did this and I feel bad. And unfortunately, I mean, I don't mind listening to that. I'm a very empathetic person, but you don't want to pay me by the hour to do that. You should have a therapist or a best friend or a minister or somebody to deal with those emotional issues. The other thing is, be ready to get divorced. I think a lot of people are not ready emotionally and they're not prepared. And I think you have to get your ducks in a row. You've got to make sure you've explored all the ideas of reconciliation. Even going to a therapist with your spouse, take one last shot at that, because even if you don't reconcile and stay together, maybe that therapist can help you deal with the divorce as it goes on, tell you how to talk to each other, tell you how to deal with your children during the divorce to make sure they're not damaged. So I think that's a really, really good idea. Mediation is fabulous. I'm a certified mediator, but I think the key is to go to a lawyer first, understand your rights, and then ask your lawyer and ask for a mediation. Because if you go into mediation not knowing what you're entitled to, you can't really agree to anything. It's like you're operating in the blind. So mediation is definitely a great choice to resolve the case.
Can you talk a little bit, Karen, as long as we brought up mediation, what the downside though of mediation is, which is if you don't come to an agreement, you kind of...
Mediation is a downside ever. I mean, the expense is there, so you're going to pay your lawyers and then you're going to pay that mediator. But in mediation, everything's private. So you can agree to things that are going to be kept between you and your spouse, which is good. You can also agree to creative solutions that the judge may not be able to do. Maybe you stay in the house for 5 years and then the house gets sold. That's something a judge probably wouldn't order, but you and your spouse can agree to that. And even if you don't resolve everything in mediation, at least you might be able to resolve some of the issues and at least kind of narrow down where the disputes are. And just because it doesn't settle that day in mediation doesn't mean it might not settle down the road based upon the things that went on in that mediation. And it's another place to kind of vent too. And not that that's the purpose of it, but I think people need to talk to each other and, you know, this is what my concerns are. This is what I'm afraid of. This is what I'd like you to do. And no one gets to do that outside mediation. So I don't think there's a lot of downside, Mary Beth. I really don't.
Okay. what about if you don't come, if they have to start over? I think mediation is the way to go, because I think it's collaborative and it's usually, like you said, better for the family over the long term. But I just, in case somebody is out there, just if you don't come to an agreement and the mediation falls apart, then you do need to start with another attorney, correct?
Not necessarily, not necessarily. There's a thing called collaborative law, which is a special way of handling divorces. Both parties have to agree. Both parties have to get lawyers who are certified. I'm a certified collaborative lawyer. But that in that case, Mary Beth, you're right. If you do this collaborative law, you go to this mediation and you don't settle, then the rules say that you now need to get a new lawyer and start over again. But I just think that mediation is the way to refine issues, get closer to the issues, and at least hear the other side as to what they want.
Great, thank you. And thank you for clarifying the different approaches.
Nicole, before we go to the next question, I do want to just add on, and it ties into a comment Karen made earlier, is when you are looking for an attorney, oftentimes, when she said like, dad's rights or mom's rights, like that's more of a marketing ploy. You do want to make sure that if you're looking at an ADR or alternative dispute resolution, to ask the attorney how much experience they've had, or like maybe what percentage of their practice focuses on that. Because we have all found that too could be a line of marketing, whether people say, yes, I'll do it collaboratively, or sure, I believe in mediation. As Karen mentioned, she's a certified mediator. So just making sure they've taken the time and that they're truly committed to these divorce processes. Because they're not, no one size fits all. Sometimes litigation is the best course of action, but it's not your only option. And oftentimes it is the least attractive for you and your family.
And I just will add, if there's any abuse going on in the marriage, or you're married to a narcissist or somebody who's verbally abusive or physically abusive, mediation doesn't work, because the bully will use that opportunity to further bully, intimidate, and harass. So it's really not productive. And in fact, it's counterproductive.
Well, I'm going to turn things back on over to estate planning with Whitney, if you guys don't mind. Whitney, the question for you is going to be, when should I update my estate plan? And I know we touched on this a little bit, so if you just want to
yeah, so really we recommend every 3 to 5 years you take a look at your estate plan, or upon a major life change. So divorce or loss of a spouse would be a major change, or a new family member, or if you want to change the fiduciaries in your documents. Also, if you move to another state, every state has varying laws as far as the requirements for powers of attorney and the execution of your trust or your will. So if you move to a different state, it's good to take a look at those changes that might be needed. Also, your beneficiary designations, you want to take a look at those, as well as your estate planning documents, because unlike your will, your trust says what happens to all the assets directed to your trust. Your IRAs, 401ks, and other retirement plans that have beneficiary designation, those have to be changed with the individual financial institution. So for example, say you had a spouse named as your beneficiary, and now your spouse is no longer living, you are going to want to update that beneficiary designation so that that asset doesn't fall into probate. And then obviously, after your spouse were to pass away, you'd also want to take a look at your estate plan to make sure that during that time, any updates that need to be made are made to the documents. And there's also, even though it's a difficult time, there's also some tax deadlines as far as if you want to make certain elections when a spouse passes away. Usually those have to be made within 9 months. So even though it is a difficult time, I encourage people to lean on a child or a family member to help them make those initial appointments and figure out what they need to do once that spouse is no longer with them.
Whitney, if they are not, perhaps you could talk high level, like a taxable estate, and if you don't have a taxable estate, do you still need to file an estate tax return?
Yeah, so each spouse has their own estate tax exemption. Right now, it's very high, so it's $12,060,000. So most individuals will not have an estate tax concern, but that's supposed to sunset in 2026 and go back down to around 5 million. So that may change things for people a little bit. It's especially of concern to a surviving spouse if their deceased spouse did not use up their exemption. They can file an estate tax return and elect portability, which is basically at the federal level, they can take their unused spouse's exemption and add it to their individual exemption, so that if your spouse left you assets that may appreciate in value during your lifetime, that will allow you to use their unused exemption so that when you die, there's no estate tax, potentially no estate tax. So it really depends on what assets the spouse had after they pass away, what amount of exemption they used, and does the spouse need to port that exemption when they die, the surviving spouse.
Great. I have a question. I'm going to turn to Mary Beth and Nicole Romito. And Nicole, let's have you answer first because Mary Beth had up the last one. Question is, someone who's worried about their finances. How do I know if I'll be able to maintain my lifestyle after my divorce?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it also applies after a spouse or partner has died. It's a common question Mary Beth and I receive, and it's a good question. As Whitney mentioned, if you've lost a spouse, and even if, you've gone through a divorce, you're typically at an emotional low point of your life. You're grieving either way how you've lost the spouse. But part of your, to-dos or your next steps are, once you have a handle on, what is your current financial situation going to be, is working with a financial planner like myself or Mary Beth. And what we'll do is, if you're getting divorced, we'll work with you and your attorney to take your settlement offer, or your finalized settlement agreement, which are just numbers on a page, and we'll help you start to build out a forward-looking financial plan that's going to take into consideration anything that touches you financially. And it would be the same thing if you're suddenly single because your spouse or partner has died. So, once you've settled the estate, if there's any taxes to pay, there'll be costs to settle the estate, and where you're sitting, we'll use the same process and still build a plan for you to say, what do you want the lifestyle to look like? And then depending on the income, the expenses, the assets you have, any debts or liabilities, we'll be able to do a very detailed plan of, the answer may be yes, the answer may be no, and then there's 100 variations or possibilities in between. If the answer is no, it may just mean, not exactly. And there could be better ways to structure the portfolio. There could be ways to reduce taxes. I think Karen mentioned, either way, the house is usually one of the largest assets in your estate. And it's also usually one of the most emotional assets in your estate. And, Mary Beth and I understand you need to have a roof over your head. And certainly if you still have children at home, but it's understanding how does that fit in to what you're trying to do overall? Because even if there's not a mortgage on the house, there are still usually significant related expenses to maintaining a house. Mary Beth, would you like to add on?
No, I think you've covered most of everything. I guess the whole thing about is understanding that you are taking a lot of assets that you may have accumulated during the marriage with your spouse, and you are dividing them. So you have to be flexible in how you're looking at that next chapter of your life financially.
And I'll just add that a lot of people think it's doom and gloom, right? I'm living on half and I'm going to have to get rid of the house. But if you try to be positive, and what I tell clients is start to think of a life that's different. You love your house, right? It's beautiful. It's got 5 bedrooms or whatever. But you know what? Maybe it's time to get a townhouse, and it's a brand new townhouse that has no repairs, and you don't have to shovel snow or mow the lawn, and your kids may like it better because it has a swimming pool as part of the community. Whatever it is, you're planning a new life. And if you have a new life to go to, this makes it easier to transition. If you're thinking of what you're giving up, you're going to be depressed and sad. But if you're thinking about your new life and how it's going to be different, but fun and engaging and maybe easier, more streamlined, that's the way to think about it, because that'll make the process a lot easier for you.
Yeah, and we have found, I think all of us on the panel today, it's an emotional time. And in particular, if you were not the one who was managing the finances, it can be very scary and very overwhelming. But what we have seen is, and now I'm dating myself, is, the more you know, it's an old ABC PSA announcement, but the more you know, at first, it may be scary and overwhelming, but as you have your team helping you through the transition and educating you, it can actually be really liberating to start to say, hey, wow, I get to make the decisions, and I don't have to consult with someone or ask someone, depending on what the dynamic was in your relationship. And I think too, when you're looking forward is, just because you may want to do something differently, it doesn't, and this comes into, Mary Beth and I see this a lot, and I'm sure Whitney does too, is when you've lost your spouse, and if you did defer to them to make the decisions, just because we're recommending you do something differently and you're deciding to, it doesn't mean your former spouse was making bad decisions or doing the wrong thing. Life evolves, and now that you're going to be moving forward to your next chapter, it may make sense to do things a little differently and may serve you better.
Absolutely. Thank you for that roundtable discussion there, folks. We're going to move on to Karen, if you don't mind. And the question for Karen is going to be around child support and spousal support. That question is, how are spousal support and child support calculated?
Well, the answer to that, if you ever want me to email you some of the rules on this, I'm happy to do that. And you can also Google it, but make sure you Google Illinois law and make sure it's a website that is up to date, because the laws have changed since roughly 2019. So a lot of people come to me and say, oh, I'm entitled to this. Well, that's Rhode Island law, and that was from 1912. So basically, maintenance, there has to be determination that you need maintenance, which means you can't support yourself. There's a bunch of factors that get considered when it comes to that. You've been out of the workforce, maybe you have been raising children, and you're just not up to the level of income that your spouse is making. So the general rule is it's 33% of the payer's net income, that's after taxes and deductions, minus 25% of your net income, whatever that might be. That's roughly. The question is then, how long do you receive maintenance? And there is a whole schedule about that. So for instance, if you're married for 10 years, you get 4.4 years of maintenance. If you are in a 20-year marriage or over, then the judge has the discretion of giving you permanent maintenance, which means you get maintenance until your husband retires or dies, or the length of the marriage. So if it's 20 years, you would get 20 years of support. So those things, though, it's really helpful to have a lawyer help you calculate that, because that's going to be very important in your future and how you're going to be able to take care of yourself. Child support has changed drastically. So if you've talked to your friends from 5 years ago, it used to be child support was based solely on the payer's income level. Now it's based on both parties' incomes. And there's no way to really tell you what child support is without plugging it into a calculator. And again, those calculators are online. Make sure you have the right one. And it's very complicated. It's how many nights do you spend with your children? How many nights does your spouse spend with children? Who's paying for health insurance? And sometimes, even if you're not earning any money because you're a stay-at-home, sometimes judges will actually impute income to you because both parties have an obligation to support their children. I will tell you the changes in child support laws have made it very difficult for the person who has the children the majority of time and may be relying upon that support. And it's certainly not enough to support your children, in my view, especially in the Chicago area. And it's also not enough for you to live on. So you really need to get very clear on what those numbers would look like, how long that support would last. And listen, you have to understand too that perhaps your spouse might lose a job during COVID. Look how many people lost jobs, people die. I mean, I just had a client whose husband was 52 years old and died of a heart attack. And she was counting on maintenance and it's gone. Or whatever it is, so you've got to really try to take care of yourself. Yes, support is something we fight for very strong, very hard for our clients, but you also have to think about illness, drug abuse, going back to court, having it modified. Just had a client went from making $750, the husband, to making $200. She has to sell her house. She has to, change her life because her income is tied to his. So you got to really think about those issues and whether or not perhaps going back to work or maybe taking more of the assets in the divorce and investing them with Mary Beth and Nicole might be a better idea than relying on maintenance. So those are all things you'll discuss with your lawyer.
I just also, and to point out, child support only goes to 18, because I just had a client that thought that would continue through, she has 3 college-age kids, through them getting through college. And we had to revamp the financial plan because they were covering a lot of the things like phones and transportation to and from, because they all attended out-of-state schools. So just something to keep in mind, that when they say child support, it stops after a certain age and you may continue to support the child financially.
Good point.
I would also just add on to that, sorry, Nicole, is if you are receiving maintenance and or child support, one of the things that Mary Beth and I often find is you also need to have as part of your budget or your cash flow is that how much do you need to save while you're receiving that? Because, as Karen said, even though, and I know Illinois has changed it, they used to call it permanent maintenance, now it's indefinite. It doesn't mean that it goes on indefinitely until that payor dies. So you want to understand how much should I be saving along the way so that when it does end, you then have this pocket of money or liquid investable portfolio that you can use to replace that income stream.
Okay, so it is almost 12:40, or it is 12:46. So I think we just have time for one more question, if y'all don't mind. And that question is going to go to Whitney about estate planning. So Whitney, what is the role of a trust in estate planning?
I think we touched upon this a little bit, but there's a lot of benefits of having a trust. For somebody who might be a single person now having lost a spouse or going through divorce, a trust can be a way to avoid the probate process. You might have had assets while you were married and joint. When your spouse passes away, now those assets may be in your individual name. So you may want to utilize a trust and be putting those assets in the name of your trust, or naming your trust as a backup beneficiary, or a beneficiary, removing your deceased spouse or your spouse and putting your trust as a beneficiary. Also, trust can be beneficial for kids that are minors. You don't necessarily want your ex-spouse in charge of assets left to your minor children until they're 18, and then those assets, once they're 18, would also go outright to those kids. by putting by creating a trust, you're creating, you can create trust for your children that would basically hold those assets for their own protection. And also you get to choose who is managing those assets for your children. If you don't want your spouse to be managing those assets, then you would name a trustee who would distribute those assets for your children, and either at specific ages or a permanent trust if you want things to stay in the family for future generations.
I would just add on too that working with clients like Nicole and I do about what to do with wealth and how to pass it on to generations that you know of now and perhaps in the future, it really, you get to define exactly what your intentions are. And because estate planning is a family matter too, and families are families, and they can fight. And so if you can make it very clear by using those estate documents, you're ultimately doing your children and any of their children a real favor by making it very clear what your intentions for your wealth are, so that they aren't fighting over various things. So the more specific that you can be, even if you don't have a 12 million within the federal exemption, it's really just a good idea, because when you're gone, you can't be asked what you intended. So it's very helpful to do that now and be intentional about it, as opposed to, letting people kind of swoop in and start to divide things that may not have been your intention at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. It can relieve some of the stress and frustration, as well as family conflict, when you have clear, you're clearly outlining what you want in your will or your trust. They're knowing exactly where those assets are going and who's going to be managing them after you pass away.
Hey, thank you all for your insight into the situation. As it's almost 1 p.m., I think we'll be wrapping up here pretty shortly. But before we do, we'd like to leave you all on the call with a kernel of wisdom from each of our panelists. Would you mind getting us started and sharing your kernel of wisdom with us, Mary Beth?
Sure. Kind of piggyback on what Karen said earlier about having something to look forward to. I share with my clients that, your life is like a novel, and there's chapters that you go through. And if you're going through a divorce or you've recently lost a spouse, it is a terrible time. There's no other way to describe it, but it is a chapter in your life. And hopefully by working with a team of advisors, we can help you look forward to that next chapter, so that, and it will pass, that you can really enjoy that next one. So if you can kind of just take this situation, know that it's kind of very difficult now, but there are people that want to help you through it, and then actually not just survive it, but thrive afterwards.
Karen, would you mind sharing your kernel of wisdom?
I really totally agree with Mary Beth. I lost my husband and my business partner about 10 years ago. And you just think doom and gloom. You think your life is over, it's never going to be good again, but it will be. And I have to tell you, it's in your attitude. And if you have the positive attitude that you're going to have a good life, you will have a good life. And I have to tell you, people move on. I keep in touch with my clients. Most of them are very happy. And you know what the comment is from a lot of them? Almost all of them. I should have done it sooner. I stayed in the marriage too long. I stayed for the wrong reasons. And I'm happier now. The children are happier now. Yes, there might be a little bit smaller house I'm living in, but they're much happier. So you will move on. There's a great life out there, and it might take a few years to get to that point, but you will be okay.
Great. Whitney?
I would just say lean on your support network. Reach out to whether you have a therapist or your divorce attorney for legal issues, or an estate planning attorney to help you prepare an estate plan once you get into that new life that you're creating after the divorce or loss of a spouse. Lean on your professionals to help you and making those decisions and planning for your future.
And Nicole?
Well, I agree. That's all great advice, ladies. I would say, to kind of build on what everyone said, is also listen to your team. Oftentimes we'll hear, whether you're going through a divorce, those of us in the industry will call it the Greek course. And so this is going to be probably most likely well-meaning family, friends, colleagues, whoever knows you're going through a divorce. And they're going to say, well, here's what I got, or here's how my divorce went. And, that's what you deserve. Every situation is different, and you don't know. Most of the time, they're not sharing balance sheets and tax returns and things like that. And even if you, for some chance, did have the exact same financial situation, what was right for the person talking to you may not be the right solution for you. And then the same thing too, as you're settling your estate, listen to your attorney, your therapist, and your financial planner, because you want to make decisions that make sense for you and your loved ones. We're all unique individuals, and we all have unique financial situations. And so the best solution for one person may not be the best solution for you. So I think with that, Mary Beth's gonna wrap us up for the day.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us today and for all the great questions. We hope that the knowledge that you gained today and that you were able to glean from our conversation help eases your mind, and also that you feel a little bit better equipped to move forward on whatever path is going to be best for you. If you would like a complimentary consultation from any of us, or have a specific question that you would like us to address on your behalf, please see the contact information that's up on the screen. We are all very eager to be a resource for you, so please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you for joining us today, and we want you to enjoy the rest of your day. Happy early St. Patrick's Day. And I guess I would also encourage you, we will continue to have sessions like this and other events within Private Vista. So we will continue to keep you in contact with what we have going on here. So thank you again, and again, enjoy your day. Take good care.